Welcome back to the Basics. I'm Marc Singer. I'm Dean of the School of Undergraduate Studies at Golden Gate University. Welcome back. We're excited to be here and to be talking with you. And our guest today, the person we're talking with, is Nina Coveney. And Nina's a project manager on park and urban redevelopment projects for Biederman Redevelopment Ventures. She's primarily responsible for large events, operations, and revenue generation at Salesforce Park, which is right across the street from Golden Gate University's campus. Previously, she was events manager at Bryant Park Corporation and 34th Street Partnership in New York City. And then before that, she worked for the town of Ithaca Planning Department in Ithaca, New York. And she's actually had quite a bit of an interesting career. She's been a researcher for a nonprofit organization that provides supportive housing for the homeless. So Nina, welcome. I'm really excited to have you here.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Yeah. And let's see, I do a little bit of housekeeping at the beginning. First of all, this is being recorded for those of you who couldn't make it on time but want to hear this really important intro part, and it will be available through Golden Gate's website, GGU Presents, if you're looking for it. That's probably where you went to register for this. Might take us a day or two to, bleep out all the inappropriate stuff that accidentally happens when we're talking right now. So that'll be up soon. We've got other events coming up on average about once a week. Next week, we'll have Michelle Neitz, who's a professor of law at Golden Gate University Law School. I also want to mention that we will probably have some time to answer some questions from you if you're joining us live. So please use the Q&A button, which is at the bottom of your screen, and you can post any questions you have there. And we will do our best to get to all of them. We'll get to more of them if our conversation drags. I'll be like, oh, let's go to the questions. But I don't think that's going to happen because Nina and I have talked a couple of times, and I'm really, I think you'll really find what she's doing and the work that she and her organization are doing is really interesting, especially now because we're going to be talking about the idea of placemaking, which I know seems very challenging at a time when we're all sheltering in place and not in public spaces, and we're redefining the way we think about community, things like that. So anyway, welcome. Great to have you here, Nina. So I have a few questions that I wanted to start out with, but I know also because so much of the work you do lends itself to like a visual presentation. You've also brought some really nice slides, like a presentation.
Yes, I have.
Okay, great. So Nina, why don't I just start asking in this work with Biederman Redevelopment Ventures, and what do you find meaningful about it?
Sure. So I studied urban planning in college, which is a very interesting field unto itself, and one that I came to kind of accidentally. I didn't go to college assuming that I was going to study that. I think a lot of people find that experience in college. They discover new things and get rerouted a little bit in their interests and their direction. And I've always loved and all the topics that kind of come together and are really come into focus in cities, and I was amazed to discover that there was a whole field, a whole major at Cornell University where I went, and so I transferred. Had to do an internal transfer at Cornell into the College of Architecture, Art, and Planning, and then and absolutely loved my studies there. Really wanted to be able to continue and work in a planning urban environment. And I'm from the New York City area, so in my kind of beginning of my career, I just felt like New York City was going to be the place to be. Really interesting stuff happening there, obviously. And so my first, I guess, real significant job after college was beginning to work at Bryant Park in Midtown Manhattan. And that is run by an incredible nonprofit organization called the Bryant Park Corporation. It is still managed to this day by Dan Biederman, who is He's the president of that nonprofit, as well as the sister nonprofit that shares the same staff called 34th Street Partnership. Both of those are business improvement districts, or BIDs. The equivalent in San Francisco is called a CBD, or community benefit district. So Dan Biederman also is the president of Biederman Redevelopment Ventures. It's essentially his kind of private, the private consulting side of what we do at Bryant Park and elsewhere. And so, yeah, I was looking in terms of how I ended up here and in San Francisco. My husband and I were kind of, just for personal reasons, looking to try out living on the West Coast for a while. So I kind of made a shift, still working for Dan, because I really enjoy working with him and on these types of things, and wanted to stay under his umbrella. So I was able to kind of do an internal transfer, if you will, to come out and work on an exciting new project here in San Francisco, where BRV is contracted to manage Salesforce Park on top of Salesforce Transit Center in downtown San Francisco.
Great. And that's really how we connected, is because, you know, we've been thinking a lot about Salesforce Park. It just opened and reopened last year, and quickly became like a center of the community in our part of San Francisco. And I a lot of our folks at GGU were really just fascinated by what the process is, and then the placemaking, right? So can you talk about what placemaking means? And I know you have some slides to talk about that as well, but just for our folks, what
Yeah,
is that?
absolutely. So BRV is really, we call ourselves a public space and placemaking consulting firm. At its kind of simplest and broadest definition, placemaking is the process of creating quality places that people want to live, work, play, and learn in. But that ends up taking a lot of different forms. It really comes into play in public spaces. There's also, people might have heard the phrases creative placemaking, tactical placemaking. It's all kind of about creating memorable places that people want to be in, that are vibrant and safe, and you know, that they think of kind of in a fond way after they've left and want to return to again.
And so that's this place, right? In our case, the one nearest us is Salesforce Park, right?
Well, yeah, that's what we try to do in every space that we work on. And placemaking, it's made up of so many different little elements that you can't exactly put your finger on. And it's a process. It's always an ongoing thing. You're never really done with placemaking. It's really a ongoing process. So yeah, I do. Maybe I'll share my screen now. Have some slides that kind of talk about this and have some illustrations of what I'm talking about.
That's probably the easiest way to describe it. Yeah, please do. I don't know if I have to do anything for you. I think you're just ready to go. There you go.
All right. Can you
Yes.
see it?
That's great.
Yep. So like I said before, placemaking is made up of so many different little elements that typically people can't quite put their finger on, but they kind of just think, wow, that park or that place or that plaza it was so great. I had a great time there. And then, you know, there are other spaces that you walk by where you think, oh, this feels a little strange or unsafe, or, you know, there's a feeling that you get, but you can't quite put your finger on it. But it's my job and my company's job to be able to put our finger on those things that aren't quite working for our public space and help our clients turn those around, and to also identify the things that make spaces really great. So I wanted to talk about a couple of those things here. But first, just a little bit more quick background on BRV. These are a couple images from a variety of projects that we've been working on, or that we have worked on in the past all over the country. We primarily work in North American cities, but have also worked in other countries around the globe. And just as a little bit more background, I think to understand what redevelopment or placemaking is, I thought a little bit of a contrasting before and after picture from Bryant Park in New York, which is kind of the, I guess, kind of the mothership or the lab of where a lot of things are learned. This picture is from before Bryant Park Corporation was formed. Bryant Park has been a public park in New York City for quite a long time, but in the 60s and 70s, when New York City was going through a real state of financial crisis and there was a big crime problem, Bryant Park is only a couple blocks from Times Square, which was kind of the epicenter of a lot of problems, drug dealing, all sorts of things. And the city had kind of just forsaken Bryant Park and many of the public parks at that point because they just, I can't blame them, they didn't have the money or the resources to worry about them. So Dan Biederman came with a proposal to take the park under private management, essentially, and formed one of the first public-private partnerships that ever helped to manage parks. So this is the before, and then this is a shot from the same angle today.
Wow.
You can see there's obviously tons of differences here, but I think difference that you notice right off the bat is just that there are people here. And people are really the main thing that attracts other people to spaces. People are drawn to places by other people. So some of the ways, why and how did all these people get here? That's some of the things that we can talk about now.
Okay, great. And I just want to mention that building back there, that's like a major institution in New York. So it's even stranger that it was like unused. That's the New York Public Library right behind it, isn't it?
Oh, yep, you are right.
Okay.
It is indeed. This is what I was saying. This is more of a great balance of softscape and hardscape, in that there's a lot of softscape, and that's what people are looking for in public spaces.
Great.
But if you have, or if you're in charge of, or you can think of a public space that has a lot of hardscape in it, it's not necessarily that the entire thing has to be ripped out and you have to start from scratch to be able to fix that balance. There are ways to creatively retrofit with softscape. So in these pictures that I've got here, the top two images are from Military Park in Newark, New Jersey. This was a disused, kind of broken fountain that was in the park when we began working on that project, and it was going to be very costly to fix the fountain and get it back to running shape. So we essentially made it a giant planting bed, and that's the picture on the right there. You can see that, you can kind of see the pots themselves are a little bit visible, but overall it just looked so much better and was a great photo op after that. And then similarly on the lower picture, the pots, the movable planters or pots that are in the foreground of the image, those are a great way to bring in more plantings and more softscape to a space.
Really nice.
All right. Another really important concept we believe is having plenty of movable, flexible furnishings in a public space. So fixed seating, most traditionally in a public space, is benches. But down on the lower picture here, this is an image from Salesforce Park. We thought it was very important to bring in a bunch of movable tables and chairs because they maximize the choice that people have in a public space, the options they have for how they can use it. They can pull chairs together if they're sitting with a larger group. If they're on their own, they can pull a chair to where they'd like to sit, whether it's in the sun or in the shade. Also, we use a lot of these same chairs for kind of setting up some audience rows or for performances or workshops, things like that. This image here, I just like to show, it's from the High Line in New York City. You can see they have a mix of these benches and the movable chairs, but pretty much everyone is sitting in all the movable chairs. The only people using the benches are over here, and they're really only using it because with the addition of the flexible movable chair, they're able to make a sitting arrangement that works for them and their group of three.
Huh. So can I ask you a question? Which is better, Highline Park or Salesforce Park?
I can't. Well, I mean, I would say Salesforce Park, But you know, they both are, and I actually do hear a lot of comparisons when I'm walking. I just overhear people at Salesforce Park saying, wow, this really reminds me of the High Line in New York. And it absolutely does, because of the elevated quality to it, and it's kind of a pathway through the sky and pretty unique perspective on the city. But they're certainly different. I think there's such a more linear nature to the High Line, and it's really just more about the process of walking the whole thing and that transition through the whole park. Whereas Salesforce Park does have larger spaces for gathering and programming in the way that we at BRV think of it.
That's what I was going to vote for too.
All right. Umbrellas are another important, really helpful tool in the placemaking toolkit. Not only do they help make a space more usable in all types of weather conditions, whether it's rain or beating down sun, they also provide a great vertical element in public spaces to help kind of define the space. You can see literally in the top picture here, the umbrellas say Bryant Park, and they help kind of brand and define the space. Otherwise, and also Military Park here, down here. But even if they're unbranded, they just kind of help anchor a space, and people will tend to cluster under them. Even if there's not a weather-related need to really be sitting under the umbrella, you'll find that the first seats that are taken up in an empty plaza are those that are under the umbrella versus out in the open.
Interesting.
Another thing to think about is water features in public spaces. And so there are plenty of parks and public spaces out there that have lovely fountains in them. However, especially maybe not so much in San Francisco, but in more four-season type places in the country, a lot of places turn off their fountains and drain them in the fall and the winter time. And that's just kind of goes against the idea of having a place be really inviting and open and serviceable to people all year round. It's, you know, if you look at a fountain in a place in the winter where it's drained and there's just dried up leaves blowing around in it, it really sends the message that this is kind of a, you know, this place is closed, it's not cared for right now. So this again is an images from Bryant Park. There's an iconic fountain there, and we have winterized the pipes in the fountain so that it can run all year round through the winter. The bottom right image is it in the winter time, and we keep it running, and it actually, if it gets below freezing, some really amazing, beautiful ice formations begin to form on the fountain and makes it just kind of transform into a whole different thing. The top right image shows the fountain running at night. So even when the park is closed, there's accent lighting on the fountain and it's still running, because you can see it from a distance from the street when it's closed. So we wanted to send that message of, you know, this is active, this place is cared for, someone's looking after it, even when it is closed for the night.
Okay, great.
Lighting to define spaces. This is just, I mean, lighting is important for public safety, but it also really helps to create an atmosphere somewhere, and also extends the hours of use for a public space, which is so important to having it be a helpful and serviceable place to people. So I think, you know, some people, there's mixed opinions about string lights. I think a lot of people like them. Some people feel like they're a little tired of them at this point, but string lighting really is an amazing placemaking tool. Again, it's kind of, I call it atmosphere in a box, when you can just, you know, you just out of the box, it's an amazing tool.
Wow. So you're saying we're so gullible, right? Just some of the string lights will make us feel like we're in a great place. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think, yeah, I mean, I think so. For lack of anything more permanent, it's a great tool to be able to, you know, light up and improve an alley. So many restaurants use them for their outdoor seating areas, and that's kind of why.
That's neat.
It's inexpensive, lightweight, but is very effective. Another thing to think about is the signage and the wayfinding in public spaces. Obviously, an important thing in a public park is posting and having visible the rules of the public space. However, you want to try to do that in a way that is still that is visually appealing, and also more welcoming than your typical rules sign. So this is kind of a contrast here between the two images. The one on the left is more your perhaps typical public park sign. Aside from just kind of the cluttered and difficult to read nature of the sign aesthetically, all of the rules on it, if you look at it, they say no this, no that. It's all about the things that you cannot do in the space, and you kind of wonder, do they even really want me here at all? Whereas the sign on the right, it's hard to read, but the phrasing of the rules at Bryant Park are, you are welcome to, and then lists the things that you can do, and then is followed by park guidelines prohibit. And then also this sign is multi-purpose. It also encompasses a brochure holder at the bottom there, so that you can pick up a brochure that tells you about all the cool activities and things that are happening in the park. People listening if you've been to Salesforce Park, you may have noticed that the rules signs at Salesforce Park are phrased the same way as this. You are welcome to, and then fill in the blank, and then park guidelines prohibit, and then there's some things outlined there.
Really nice. I think I've seen this approach taken with really good websites too. Where you're not just saying don't do this, don't do that. You're saying like, welcome. Here's what we have to offer.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing to mention, food and beverage are really great and important activators of public space. Everyone needs to eat. People love eating outside. So if you have food and beverage offerings in a public space, it's just going to bring that next level of vibrancy to the space. But sometimes, and mobile carts are frequently a popular way to do that in a public space. However, they can sometimes get out of hand. On the left there is an image of a kind of typical hot dog vendor in New York City. Whereas on the right side, these are they're very different from each other, but a little bit more, design conscious, streamlined, sophisticated type of design for the offering. So once there's kind of some basics to the physical elements of the public space, but then there's also, once you've got those down, there's time, or there's reason to really sweat the small stuff that's gonna set apart your public space from others. This is just showing so actually the sign, that Bryant Park rules sign that I showed a couple slides ago, this is the back side of one of those signs. And on the left here, it used to be, it's made of metal, it's gray metal. So the back side of it, where there's no information, is kind of just blank. So that was bothering Dan, the president of Bryant Park Corporation. So he felt that we used kind of a visual illusion that we call it a Callahan treatment. I'm not exactly sure where that came from, but as you can see in the image on the right, we had somebody take a photograph of what you would be seeing if that sign wasn't there. And then we had that printed high res on vinyl stickers, vinyl application, and applied that to the back of the sign, so that the sign almost disappears into the greenery.
That's great.
And we did that on all the signs that we could in Bryant Park. Of course, again, beyond the physical stuff, maintenance, attention to the space in an ongoing way is so important. Clean and safe are something you hear a lot in terms of the services that BIDs provide and that good parks offer in abundance. And those types of things do really send the message that a place is cared for and there's somebody looking after it.
So a lot of the aesthetic things you're talking about really have practical dimensions as well. They're not just to make something pretty. They're there to make somebody feel welcome or invited into the space, so to make sure they use it.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great.
So also in terms of, we like to think about a public space as being able to offer amenities to people. You might think the typical amenities of a public park might be public restrooms, or might be a drinking fountain. That might be about it. But the things that'll really take it to the next level and encourage people to stay and use the park in positive ways can be Wi-Fi outlets that are available for the public to use. And then the picture on the right here is from Salesforce Park. We have a games cart there, as well as an art cart and a reading room cart where there are supplies there, or rather a bunch of board games and chess and things that people can pick up and use while they are in the area. And then it's kind of an honor system thing that they return them. And this, it just, we think of these carts and these amenities as really the building blocks of community building. They're very small things, but they're important to creating a sense of civility in the space and encouraging people to come back again, because maybe they know, oh, my favorite game is at Salesforce Park, and I can bring my friend, and then I can come back another time if I have another friend, and we can play again. So it kind of creates that audience and that almost like the idea of like a repeat customer, I guess, but for public spaces.
Wow. So you actually led into something that I had been planning to ask you about, which is the overall philosophy or the goals of the programming at Salesforce Park. Can you talk about that? And in particular, are there differences in the way you would approach this in a place like San Francisco from how you might approach it in, some other city?
So yeah, I can definitely talk about the philosophy that informs the programming at Salesforce Park, as well as other parks that we're involved with. I actually do have some slides, I think they're right after this, that illustrate that. So let me just check. I'll skip over that. All right, so this starts to get into the talking about programming and all of that. And it really goes back to what I said at the beginning here, that the primary thing that attracts people to public spaces is other people. So how do you get those people there? You want to try to attract diverse visitors who are going to be using the park in different ways and at different times of the day, and also increase their dwell time in the park, or how long they stay in the park, so that their chances of being seen by other users of the space goes up. So one of the best way we can think of to do that, to draw people to the park and make them stay longer, is with programming. So these are all images from different programs that occur at Salesforce Park. Unfortunately, not right now. Everything has been suspended due to coronavirus concerns. But before that, we were offering a lot of different things here: children's programs, arts and crafts, fitness, movie screenings, cultural performances, dance lessons, a whole bunch of different things. And the key to that is, there's a lot of words on this chart, but the point is that we want to focus on things that are offered regularly, whether that's every day or maybe regularly recurring every week. So those are the things that people can come to rely on at the park and know that they're going to be there, and they have a reason to come, and they have a reason to come back, whether it's the next day or the next week. Those are the things that are really going to enliven a space and have people come. So many parks across the US, you can probably think of them, tends to be the larger parks, perhaps not so much smaller urban parks, but there are large parks across the US where people say, oh yeah, I've been to them, they have events, but then when they actually think about it, they say, oh, well, actually they have one music festival per year at that park, and that's when I've been there. But then other than that, there's actually nothing really going on, and I don't really have a reason to go there otherwise. Right. That's not the idea that we want people to have about public spaces. We want them to think that there's something there for them every day of the week, all year round.
So they need to feel a sense of ownership of the space, I guess, to some extent.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes back also to the games cart that I mentioned, and those other carts of supplies that we have. Obviously, one of the first questions we get about those is, aren't you worried that people are going to steal stuff, or that things are going to walk away or get wrecked? And sure, yes, that happens occasionally. It's kind of a cost of doing business, and we have plans and budget to replace materials here and there as we need to. But the point of having it be more of an honor system type thing, where people are free to use the materials, and then as long as they bring them back, is about instilling that sense of ownership over the park and trusting people that they're going to do the right thing and use the space in a positive way that is intended. So of course there's a small percentage of people that aren't going to do that, but really for the most part, it's wildly successful. People are delighted that it's there. and they respect the kind of the intention of the whole thing.
That's great. So turns out, I don't know if you noticed it, but there was a question on this very thing, and you've answered it. What other buy-ins are there besides the honor system with the games, and that sense of ownership is really very much what it's about, it sounds like.
Yeah, I can't, because I'm sharing my screen, I can't see the questions, but yeah, we do have an attendant type person who is out in the park for the majority of the hours that those types of amenities are open. So they're kind of overseeing it in a general way, and they make sure that it gets opened up in the morning, and then at the closing hour, everything gets packed back up again. And they also are around to make sure things are neat or to restock art supplies or something if they need to. But even just having that person there doing that is a great thing, because it provides another touch point for the public to realize that there is somebody who is looking out for this space and taking care of it, and is a point of kind of customer service almost.
Right, that's great. So another question that just came in, if you don't mind me going to those,
Sure.
Because it seems like there'd be a lot of different parties, who would be interested in the success of this. I think this may be where the question comes from. Are you able to answer a question about where the budget for this comes from? Is it community funded, or how does that work? Is that all right, Beth?
So in terms of across all of our projects, the funding situation ends up being different in every situation. But for Salesforce Park in particular, the funding comes from TJPA, which is the Trans-Bay Joint Powers Authority. They're the government agency that owns and operates the transit center. We actually do get a lot of, just when I'm out in the park, I get a lot of questions about whether I am a Salesforce employee or whether Salesforce is paying for all of this stuff. And the answer to that is no and no. Salesforce is they have the naming rights for the whole transit center and the park. But they are not involved in the day-to-day operation of the park and all of that. So I guess their naming rights contribution generally goes into everything that happens at the transit center, but they're not the ones that are making the decisions or controlling the operations of the programming and the park and all of that.
Okay, great. That's helpful. Thank you.
All right. Moving along here, another thing that comes that ties into the philosophy of the programming or how we decide how to do programming at Salesforce Park or other places is thinking about the flow of user groups who may want to or be using a park at different times of the day. So if you think about this, the day as a giant clock, the types of people who may be out and wanting to use the park in the very early morning might be early morning exercisers. In the mid-morning, families with young children tend to be really great users of public space, typically with kids who are not yet old enough to be in school. By 10 a.m. or so, they are just desperate to get out of the house and have something to do with their young child. So they're really great users of public space in the mid-morning. Around lunchtime, office workers, those who work around an urban public space, are typically going to be the biggest audience, people who are looking to have a nice lunch al fresco, taking a break from their desks. In the afternoon, once those types of office workers go back to their desks, seniors who are retired and students who have finished with school for the afternoon are great users of public space. And then in the evening, once work gets out, those office workers, again, are going to be a great audience, as well as residents who live around the space and have come home from their jobs. So there's obviously kind of different programming that's going to appeal to these different types of groups or serve them better in different ways. So we try to really offer that wide variety of programming so that there can be a steady flow of visitors throughout the day and throughout the week.
Great. Okay.
So this is not, exactly about going into the programming, but just in terms of being able to learn from programming and keep improving it and tweaking it into the future, because of course, as we know, placemaking is a process. We keep we collect a lot of data at Salesforce Park, and by that I don't mean very super intrusive data, just what one can observe from being in the park themselves. We count any program that we have, whether it's a yoga class or a kids program. We count all the participants and just keep track of how many people are joining week to week, so that we can understand the ebb and flow, and whether weather affected attendance or something else like that. And then we also do a park-wide count twice a day at Salesforce Park, to understand who is around and when is the park busiest. So you can see here, this is just kind of general data over several months. We do approximately a lunchtime count, so around 12:30, and then around 5:30 in the evening. So you can see that the trends tend to be that those lunchtime counts, which are the red line, for some reason in the middle of the week they really peak. There must be a lot of people who, kind of on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, they want to get out of the office and have lunch in the park. But our afternoon counts actually are the lowest on those same weekdays. And then the evening counts are the highest on weekends. So it suggests the times that people are wanting to come and use the park, and might help us tweak the timing or the schedule for programming in the future. Oops,
Okay.
this picture
Yeah.
looks strange.
There, yeah, it does. Well, Nina, we only have a couple minutes left anyway, so maybe I can, yeah, because no, there's a ton here. I want to say, like, I know recently with everyone sheltering in place, a lot of folks have shied away from showing pictures of people in crowds or in groups walking around. I guess it stirs up unpleasant memories for folks, but I think it's really a nice reminder of that, that sense of community that brings us all to live in a city or thereabouts. And so I really love those images that you had there. But it raises a question for me that I think I've been trying to ask folks in this here, in these conversations. Do you have what's lost when we're not able to have access to spaces like that? Like how does that change things for people day to day?
Mm-hmm. I think they're in a lot of ways, and fortunately in San Francisco and a lot of other big cities, parks and public spaces are they're not totally closed right now. I mean, in some cases they are, or the parking lot of the place is closed. So in some cases they're closed, but in many other cases they are staying open, which I think is really important. And I think people are realizing now more than ever that parks have always been there and have always been important, but now they are even more so. So the space itself being there and being open is one piece of it, but I think unfortunately what is lost is what we've just been talking about, the programming, the things that bring people together physically, but also as a community. Those things have been suspended so much right now. So I think people are learning new ways to use public spaces, or even just discovering public spaces near them for the first time, which is wonderful. And hopefully once if things can go back to normal, however long that takes, I think people will be better users of public space and better appreciators of public space in the future.
Yeah, but this is going to have to affect the way you think about programming at a place like this when people do start gradually coming back, right? Have you already started thinking about that, or
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of our clients all across the U.S., that's the biggest question they're asking right now. How do we adapt our public spaces, or how might public programming like this look different for the next however long, I don't know, 6 months, year, however long this takes. So I think the biggest thing there is just adapting programs a little bit to be able to use more physical space. I think there's still a lot that can be done as long as participants are spread out from each other and wearing masks. I think fitness classes can still happen in a way if people are spread out from each other and they bring their own equipment. Like in the past at Salesforce Park, we provided yoga mats to people for yoga and for some other classes. But before the coronavirus, before shelter in place even happened and we ended up canceling things, we had stopped providing those shared mats to people and asked people to bring their own. So in the future, people will perhaps have to be a little bit more self-sufficient, but I think we can still have those offerings, and just kind of the logistical considerations that come into it. If people are more spread out, it's going to be a little bit harder for them to hear an instructor. So we need to bring in amplification equipment for the instructor to be able to be heard from a further distance away by all the participants. So that's one small logistical thing. Also having sanitizing wipes and cleaner, things like that on hand to wipe down any possibly shared, any equipment involved in the program before and after it's used. And also, if in the future, there will probably continue to be caps on the number of people that might be able to participate in things or gather at one time. But I think even if that gathering limit is limited to 50 people or so, there's still a lot that could be done. But we may have to institute like a free pre-registration for crowd control purposes, just so that we know how many people are coming, and have to cap that at 50, unfortunately, which is not part of the not part of the philosophy that we would ideally like to have for programming. We really want things to be free and open to the public, and have the lowest barrier to participation possible, but that might have to be a little bit of a change in the future.
Yeah, but it doesn't sound like it's a structural rethinking of it. It's just scale and sort of putting safety protocols in place more than anything else, if I'm hearing that.
Yeah, I think it's important to try to replicate what we were doing before as much as possible, because the point is to bring people out to public spaces and have them enjoy them. I mean, if you switch to a virtual type thing where people are just in their homes, then there's not really a point to that. The public space is not being used. So we're trying to think of ways to still bring people out to the public spaces, but have it be safe for them.
So, I'm at Golden Gate University, as we mentioned, as people know, and we have some public spaces around our building, but not many. We are across the street from Salesforce Park, so in a way that's part of our public space. But do you have any free advice you could give me about how to use our space a little bit more effectively and along these lines?
Well, I'm not sure how much.
Not the expensive advice, the free advice.
I'm not sure how much physical space there is there. How much you have to work with, and especially in these coronavirus times, might be a little bit tricky to get a critical mass of people into that space doing something. But I would say, short of that, the thing that right now Golden Gate University could be doing is acting as a resource in other ways for their community, perhaps not offering that physical space, but providing information for people in terms of where they can go right now, send them over to Salesforce Park or other parks that are nearby to them. Perhaps messaging about when those public spaces are not as crowded, just in case people are worried about that type of thing. So perhaps it's in kind of the messaging and providing information to people rather than the physical space.
That's helpful. We could also do things like talk shows and stuff like that too, I suppose. Right?
Yeah.
That info. Yeah, and I know we didn't get a chance to talk about. I know you have a couple other projects in San Francisco, right? There's Mission Rock, and there's the 5M. I'm sorry we didn't get to talk as much about that as I would have liked, but our technical difficulties sort of got in the way.
I know, sorry about that.
No, well, it could have been anybody. But there is one question here that I think I can try to answer that is definitely worth asking, which was somebody was asking about whether or not there's some data that demonstrates the positive impact placemaking has on a city's population, like something measurable. And this person lives in a small town, and sometimes I'm reading from this question or comment. It says, and sometimes I think the local government is missing out. Are there links to anything like that that we could put in the notes when we post this on on the website and on YouTube?
Yeah, there are a few good resources on that. Off the top of my head, I can't just throw them out, but yeah, I can certainly follow up with you after this, and we could provide them in the links when the recording is released.
So it's a really good question, and as an educational institution, I guess that should have been where I went with this. But But yeah, all right, I'll follow up with you then, and because it would be nice to have people have resources that they could go to for this sort of.
Yeah.
All right, well, Nina Coveney, I really want to thank you. I said your name again because I was mangling it before, and I just wanted to show you that I really learned it. All right, I really appreciate your taking the time to talk with me today. You're at Nina's project manager, in case you didn't hear the beginning, on park and urban redevelopment projects for Biederman Redevelopment Ventures. I really want to thank you for your time, and this has been really helpful. And I look forward to the time when we can all just sort of crowd back into some of these public spaces that you've been talking about for the last 40 minutes.
Yes, me too.
Yeah, me too. All right, so that's it. As I mentioned, next week we'll be talking about blockchain with Michelle Neitz, who's professor of law at Golden Gate University. There's a lot to that as well. Totally different subject, right? No blockchain in your parks at all, as far as I know. Yeah.
Nope. Unless that's a children's activity where you play with blocks.
I'll find out before the show. I think that's probably the answer. All right, thanks. So we'll, as I said, this will be posted on YouTube and on the GGU website for folks who didn't get a chance to hear it today. But thanks very much, Joyce. I think we have some music we have to play. We have outro music now.
All right, thank you.
All right.